What's up, my Paw Patrol? Nah, it's stupid too. We got one of the weirdest Twitter beefs over the weekend. It was super entertaining to watch, and it culminated with this moment where there's a purported fund of $2.6 million that will be donated to charity if this Dr. Peter Hotez, goes on the Joe Rogan Experience and debates RFK Jr. $2.6 million. Perhaps you've seen it. Perhaps you saw all the trending. Like, look at what's trending for me right now. Like 3 of my 4 You topics are all related to this one thing. It was like unavoidable for me on Twitter. So why don't we break it down, see who the players are, see what brought them to this point, and what happened during this weird Twitter exchange between Joe Rogan, Dr. Peter Hotez, RFK Jr., Elon Musk, I guess like Andrew Tate. I don't know. There were so many people involved at this point. Let's just jump into it. So there's a few key people that you're going to need to know about in this situation. One, there's Joe Rogan, podcast extraordinaire, stand-up comedian, commentator for the UFC. I think everyone kind of knows who he is. I'm not going to go deeper into his lore than that. The other 2 key members in this whole debacle, one of them was RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from the esteemed Kennedy family. His father, Robert Kennedy Sr., was a senator in some state, and his uncle was, of course, John F. Kennedy, the president who may or may not have been assassinated by the CIA, allegedly. RFK has been making the rounds over the past few months, doing a bunch of different podcasts. He did Theo Vaughn. He most recently, as of last week, went on the JRE for episode 1999. RFK is an environmental lawyer by trade, and he's also an anti-vaccine advocate. He believes vaccines have been causing a lot of health issues, and specifically in children, such as, let's see, what was the list here? Autism, attention deficit disorder, food allergies, cancer, autoimmune diseases, etc., etc. Essentially, he's based in red pill. Listen, I'm too dumb to try and figure out if he's right or wrong, but I did listen to him on his most recent episode of the JRE, and he makes some pretty compelling arguments, at least with the vaccine stuff. I'm not so sure about Wi-Fi cancer. And he's also making a play for president, running under the Democratic Party. Then we have Dr. Peter Hotez, a doctor who is extremely pro-vaccine. If you want a bit of a deeper dive into Dr. Peter Hotez's views on vaccines, I think it's worth checking out this vid right here that Rogan retweeted. I think it kind of summarizes. It's by this guy, Matt Orfalia at 0RF.
So even though COVID poses zero threat to healthy children,
vaccinate your children.
Do the right thing. Be safe and not sorry.
I'm strongly recommending for adolescents to get their 2 doses of vaccine. Get that 3rd immunization. The 2 mRNA vaccines were always a 3-dose vaccine. A 4th immunization.
Oh, get your new bivalent booster.
He's made 2 appearances on Joe Rogan's podcast in the past, one in 2019 and one in 2020. I believe it was April 2020, so very early on into the pandemic, which pits these 2, Dr. Hotez and RFK Jr., at some kind of like ideological impasse. So the prelude to this back and forth happened on the most recent JRE. Hotez's issue was not only the general conversation just around the vaccine that they were having throughout the podcast, but also this clip here where he specifically calls him out.
All these controversial opinions that you have you had anyone debate you publicly about any of these?
Nobody will debate me. For 18 years, nobody will debate me. In fact, I've asked Hotez many, many times to debate me. And I think you've asked him, here, why don't you debate Robert Kennedy? And he said, because he's a cunning lawyer or something like that. But I've debated Hotez on the telephone, with kind of a referee. His science is just made up. He cannot stand by it. He can't cite studies.
Well, he was trying to tell me that vaccines don't cause autism. I said,
yeah,
okay,
and his daughter has
I
autism, and he wrote a book. But I've read that book, and there is no science cited in that book. It's just him saying, it didn't happen.
So it all starts off with this first tweet here. This happened in the AM of June 17th on Saturday. Dr. Peter Hotez tweets out, Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. That is just the headline of this Vice article that he's tweeting out. So that should be in quotations, but it isn't. But then he goes on to say, this is his thoughts after. It's really true at the writer Anna Merlin, just awful. And from all the online attacks I'm receiving after this absurd podcast, it's clear many actually believe this nonsense. The article that he's referencing in this tweet is a Vice article. It says Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. So that's the article he's referencing, just like this award-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning article. So he tweets that out. Elon jumps in the comment section. He says, So you're endorsing Vice. So Rogan replies to that initial tweet from Dr. Peter Hotez referencing that Vice article, and Rogan says, Peter, if you claim what RFK Jr. is saying is, quote, misinformation, I am offering $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you're willing to debate him on my show with no time limit, which I think is a pretty fair offer. Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast in human history. It's like the biggest platform in the world currently. And he's saying, hey, look, if you disagree what this man is saying, because again, if you listen to that podcast, he makes some compelling arguments. I'm too stupid to know if RFK Jr. is telling the truth or he's been led astray by some misinformation. So the only way for someone like me who is open to hearing both sides of an argument is to bring the other argument onto the podcast. And on top of that, Rogan is offering $100,000 to the charity of your choosing. This seems extremely generous on Rogan's part. If you like him, don't like him, I think it was a pretty cool thing for him to do. Robert Kennedy replies to that. He says, Peter, let's finally have the respectful, congenial, informative debate that the American people deserve. So needless to say, this tweet from Rogan got 54.8 million views. Like, it just blew up on the platform. Elon was in the comment section. A lot of people were talking about it. Hotez replies by saying, Joe, you have my cell, my email. I am always willing to speak to you, which in my opinion is a bit of a non-answer. To me, it just seemed like a way for him to try and change the subject and like skirt around the question without actually having to answer it. Scrolling through the comment section, it seemed like a lot of people kind of had that same sentiment, including one Mr. Joe Rogan, who then replied to this tweet by saying, this is a non-answer. I challenge you publicly because you publicly quote tweeted and agreed with that dog shit Vice article. If you're really serious about what you stand for, you know you have a massive opportunity for a debate that will reach the largest audience a discussion like this has ever had. If you think someone else is better qualified, suggest that person. Rogan also replied to his own tweet with a screenshot of a now tweeted and then deleted tweet from Peter Hotez, who initially replied to his offer of $100,000 by saying, be serious, Joe. That's what you throw out for your hunting buddies on a weekend. A $50 million endowment, which you/Spotify/RFK Jr. can easily afford. Not for me, but so we can continue making low-cost, patent-free vaccines for the world's poor, preceded by RFK Jr.'s public apology. Joe Rogan commented on that, saying, by the way, Peter, I saw this tweet that you deleted. That is an insane thing to say. Let me break that down. So Rogan offers you $100,000 and the chance to debate and shout down someone you think has nonsense, bogus views of the world. Cool. Your reply to that is, give my company $50 million so we can make vaccines, even though you disagree with the idea of what I'm making. And then I also want a public apology from RFK Jr., who at this point has not really even said all that much. This has really just been between you and Joe. That's such a narcissistic, entitled response. You want $50 million. What are you, out of your mind? Hotez ignores that deleted tweet that he had completely and just continues on by replying to that non-answer tweet that Joe put out saying, Joe, if you are serious about addressing vaccines, plus the fact that 200,000 unvaccinated Americans needlessly perished during our awful Delta/BA1 COVID waves, including 40,000 in our own state of Texas, because they fell victim to vaccine disinformation, I want to have that discussion. He then goes on to say, and I'm open to a number of different options, but to be pressured to give you an answer on Twitter now with a take it or leave it demand, that's not how I work. Honestly, I don't even think that would be in your best interest. I'm happy to come on and have a meaningful discussion. I respect you and the show, and I don't want an adversarial relationship. I think we can make some progress. So again, in this instance, he has no issue speaking and taking the clout, if that's what you want to call it, by going on Rogan and getting the bump and getting more people and eyes on him to further his career. But he doesn't want his views to have any kind of real pushback from someone who is at least seemingly very learned on the whole vaccine industry. So Rogan digs back about a month. This happened on May 5th, and he screenshot this tweet here where he's replying to Tucker Carlson's Twitter announcement saying, I'm quite concerned about the Elon Tucker link, and then fold in Rogan and RFK Jr., and it becomes a pretty formidable coalition with neo-fascist leanings, in some ways darker or perhaps more dangerous than Trump, in my opinion. awful. I just hope Team Biden is preparing. Again, Rogan kind of just cucks him and puts him in his place by saying, are you sure I'm not part of a coalition with neo-fascist leanings? Seems like that's what you really think, or what you're projecting to the masses. Rogan continues by saying, to those misunderstanding what he's saying, he's not agreeing to debating Robert Kennedy Jr. He's just offering to come on my show by himself. Rogan then one final time says, again, I'm going to ask you very clearly, are you willing to debate Robert Kennedy Jr. on my podcast? Obviously, we never get a solid answer out of the man, at least on Twitter. That's where things ended. There's a few things that kind of happened afterwards that I like to dive into. Tom Nichols, who's a writer for The Atlantic, tries to slide into the situation by saying no medical professional should ever agree to do this. Never. It elevates the conspiracy guy, demeans the medical professional, and will only convince the kooks out there that RFK is right because a real doctor took the time to debate him. Never debate a conspiracy theorist. Joe would then reply to this saying, that would be a great suggestion if you could assure that the industry you were representing wasn't completely captured by heartless monsters who have a history of some of the biggest criminal fines in human history because their deception has cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives. It would be a great suggestion if the industry you were defending didn't occasionally look at human beings as an opportunity to generate insane wealth regardless of the tragic consequences. But you can't do that, so maybe it would be a good idea to have a fucking debate. And I think that kind of sums up the situation all right there. I think most people would like to take the pharmaceutical companies and the doctors at their word that the things they're giving us are helping us. But you look at things like SSRIs and possibly vaccines and all these medications that they've given people over the years that have done killed many people, and then because the profits like completely outweigh what they have to pay in fines, it's like they don't really care. There's no repercussions for them. So as I said, there was pretty much like everyone was talking about it on Twitter over the weekend, which led to a lot of people jumping in on the donation after it was kind of clear that Dr. Peter Hotez was not going to agree. So I found this Twitter account, Chief Nerd at the Chief Nerd, who summarized it pretty well. This was last updated 6/18, so I guess that was Sunday at 11 p.m. So as of me recording this, there is now $2.62 million being raised here if he comes on the JRE podcast and debates RFK Jr. We have Jae Kwon with the 777K. We got Andrew Tate with $500,000. We got Nicholas Mugalli with 250K. Bill Ackman 150K. Joe Rogan 100K. Patrick Bet-David 100K. Who is this? Steve Kirsch for 100K. Tim Pool jumped in for 100K. And then to cap everything off, Dr. Hotez does his round of interviews where basically he espouses that he just doesn't want to debate. He doesn't want to do it.
And I offered to come and go on Joe Rogan again. I've been on a couple of times and have that discussion with him, but not to turn it into the Jerry Springer show with having RFK Jr. on.
Because it's not really about the debate. If it was about finding out information, as you said, you've already written about vaccines and autism. You've already spoken and written about COVID vaccines. I think you've been on MSNBC and other channels hundreds of times since the start of the pandemic. People can hear your views and the evidence you bring to this, so they're not actually interested in evidence.
I hate this interviewer because that's such a gaslight. It really obfuscates the point where it's like, I'm not watching MSNBC because there's so much, if you want to talk about misinformation and disinformation, so much of it comes from mainstream news. I don't think that's just a left-wing issue. I think Fox News does it too. I'm not going to read some boring science book. I have too many other things to do. And speaking on TV and these like 5-minute, 10-minute sound bites, that's not how that's not how you formulate ideas. So just saying I'm not going to debate him because I think he's crazy, that's stupid. Because it's not about you and it's not about him. It's about people like me watching at home who want to see the other side of the argument, and now you're just backing down and I'm being robbed of that. So I mean, who am I inclined to agree with now? Thanks, Peter Hotez. I'm now an anti-vaxxer.